Hey everyone! This is a quick reminder to subscribe and hit that like button. It lets me know that you are enjoying my content. Also, feel free to drop your suggestions for future stories in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and let's dive right in. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as I pushed open the glass doors of McDonald's, the familiar smell of grease and fryer oil hitting me like a greasy slap to the face. Welcome to the night shift. Population, me and the occasional drunk looking for nuggets. I adjusted the visor on my head, my reflection in the window showing a tired woman with just enough sarcasm in her eyes to survive minimum wage. This wasn't exactly where I'd planned to be after losing my last job, but hey, life's funny like that. Hey, you must be Sasha, a voice grunted from behind the counter. I turned to see my new manager. Late 20s, scruffy beard, and the kind of permanent scowl that screamed, "I hate my job more than you do." His name tag said Chris, but something told me he wasn't the friendly type who'd appreciate small talk. Yep, that's me. Ready to serve burgers and question my life choices. Chris didn't laugh, he just sighed, grabbed a thin black manual from beneath the register and slapped it onto the counter. Read this. Follow the rules, don't ask questions. Wow, great onboarding process, I muttered. He shot me a look that could have curdled milk. Just do your job and don't screw around. Night shifts, different. Before I could ask what that meant, he turned and disappeared through the employee-only door without so much as a goodbye. Cool. Real people person, that guy. With a sigh, I flipped open the manual. It looked like standard corporate nonsense until I hit page 2. My eyebrows lifted as I scanned the list of rules printed in bold. Night shift rules. 1. If a customer orders food between 2:33 a.m. and 2:37 a.m., do not take their order. 2. If you hear footsteps in the kitchen while alone, leave immediately without looking back. 3. If the fryer starts on its own, do not turn it off, just walk away. 4. Do not serve from the ice cream machine if it works perfectly after midnight. 5. Do not acknowledge the man in the yellow hoodie if he appears in the lobby. 6. If you see an extra employee in uniform, do not speak to them. I stared at the page, waiting for the punchline. Maybe this was some kind of hazing ritual for new hires. But the longer I read, the heavier the air around me seemed to get, like the restaurant itself was holding its breath. Right, I muttered, flipping the manual shut. Welcome to the night shift. Follow the rules and maybe don't die. Got it. The first hour was surprisingly normal. A few night owls came through, truckers grabbing coffee, college kids ordering fries, and one guy who swore he needed 30 chicken nuggets to soak up the booze before his girlfriend picked him up. I smirked as I handed him the bag, wondering if nuggets really had the power to save relationships. Between orders, I wiped down the counters, listening to the distant hum of kitchen appliances. The fryer sizzled faintly, and the overhead fan droned on like white noise. It wasn't exactly thrilling, but hey, boring meant no weird rules to deal with, right? Then at 12:05 a.m., the ice cream machine purred to life. I glanced at it instinctively. Instead of the usual mechanical groan, it hummed smoothly, almost too smoothly. The little screen blinked its green, ready light, like it had finally decided to cooperate with humanity. I took a step toward it before freezing. Rule number 4, do not serve from the ice cream machine if it works perfectly after midnight. I hesitated, my fingers curling against the counter. The air felt wrong, like the temperature had dropped just a little too much. The hum of the machine seemed louder now, vibrating faintly beneath my feet. Okay, not creepy at all, I muttered, forcing myself to turn away. As I did, a voice spoke right behind me. Excuse me? I jumped so hard I nearly knocked the ketchup dispenser off the counter. Whipping around, I found a customer standing there. A woman with tired eyes and a bemused smile, probably wondering why the cashier looked like she'd seen a ghost. Sorry, didn't hear you come in, I said, my heart hammering in my chest. It's fine, just a large coffee, please. Shaking off the nerves, I poured the coffee and handed it over, managing a small smile. Fake scare number 1, I thought. Hopefully, the rest of the night would stay that way. Fake. By the time I finished wiping down the soda machine, the clock read 12:50 a.m. The restaurant had gone quiet again, the last customer having left 5 minutes ago. I turned to grab the sanitizer spray when I heard it, faint but unmistakable. Footsteps. They echoed softly from the kitchen, just beyond the stainless steel counter. I froze, the air suddenly too thick to breathe. The kitchen was empty. I knew that. Chris had left, and there hadn't been a single sound from the employee door. Yet the footsteps continued. Slow and deliberate, like someone pacing barefoot across the tiled floor. Rule number 2. If you hear footsteps in the kitchen while alone, leave immediately without looking back. I backed away from the counter, heart hammering in my chest. Every instinct screamed to glance over the counter, just a quick look to prove I was alone, but the rule burned in my mind. I forced myself to turn and walk toward the lobby, each step feeling heavier than the last. The footsteps paused, then resumed, following just a few beats behind me. I quickened my pace, reaching the front counter and gripping its edge until my knuckles ached. For a moment, I swore I could feel cold breath against the back of my neck. Then the footsteps stopped. Silence pressed against my ears, louder than any sound. I waited, counting the seconds until my breathing slowed. When nothing else happened, I finally allowed myself to glance back toward the kitchen. Empty. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it. The fryer silent, the ice cream machine still humming faintly, and the stainless steel counters reflecting the dim overhead lights. I let out a shaky laugh, trying to brush off the lingering fear. Guess I'm officially losing it, I muttered. The hum of the ice cream machine was the only response. I exhaled slowly, leaning against the counter as my pulse began to settle. Maybe I'd inhaled too much fryer grease, or maybe the lack of sleep was messing with my head. Either way, hearing phantom footsteps wasn't exactly the quirky small-town job vibe I'd signed up for. The hum of the ice cream machine still buzzed faintly from the corner, like it was waiting for me to slip up. I shot at a glare and returned to wiping down the counter, trying to shake off the lingering unease. The next hour passed with the steady rhythm of customers filtering in and out. A pair of college kids stumbled through the door, giggling as they ordered fries and debated whether McDonald's fries were scientifically perfect. A tired trucker rolled up to the drive-thru, his voice rough from hours on the road as he ordered black coffee and a sausage McMuffin. The normalcy helped ground me, even if my fingers still twitched with leftover adrenaline from the footsteps. By the time the clock crept toward 1:30 a.m., the restaurant had fallen quiet again. I busied myself with the closing prep, wiping down trays, restocking napkins, the usual mindless tasks that let my brain wander. That's when I heard it. A low pop of oil, sharp and sudden, followed by the unmistakable hiss of bubbling grease. I froze mid-step, my gaze snapping toward the kitchen. The fryer had switched on by itself, its red light blinking steadily. The oil inside churned and spat as if something invisible had been dropped into it. The air thickened, the faint smell of burnt grease creeping into my nose, but there was nothing frying, no fries, no nuggets, nothing. Just the sound of bubbling oil, and something else. Beneath the fryer's hiss, faint whispers crackled through the air like static. I couldn't make out words. Just the eerie cadence of voices too far away to hear clearly. My skin prickled with cold sweat as I backed away from the counter, heart hammering against my ribs. Don't turn it off. Just walk away. I repeated the rule in my head like a mantra, each step backward feeling slower and heavier. My eyes stayed locked on the fryer as if it might lunge at me the moment I blinked. The whispers rose and fell like the static of a distant radio station, just beyond comprehension. Then, beep! I yelped, heart leaping into my throat as the drive-thru speaker crackled to life. Hello? I clutched my chest, swallowing a shaky breath as the tension snapped like a rubber band. Welcome to McDonald's, what can I get you? I managed, my voice cracking slightly. Yeah, double quarter pounder, no onions, large fries, and a Coke. The normalcy of the order grounded me like a splash of cold water. I forced a shaky smile, even though the customer couldn't see me. Sure thing. Fries might be extra crispy tonight, courtesy of the haunted fryer. There was a pause. What? Nothing. Pull up to the second window. As I rang up, the fryer's hiss began to fade, the bubbles slowing until the machine clicked off with a soft ping. The whispers vanished as abruptly as they'd come, leaving only the faint hum of the overhead lights. I exhaled, resting my hands on the counter to steady myself. My fingers trembled faintly, but I pushed the fear down, stuffing it into that part of my brain labeled "deal with later." The fryer had followed the rules. I had followed the rules. Everything was fine, right? The man at the drive-thru window was in his late 30s, with stubble on his chin and a baseball cap pulled low over tired eyes. He barely glanced at me as I handed over the bag of food, mumbling a quick thanks before driving off into the night. I lingered at the window for a moment, watching the taillights disappear down the empty street. Outside, the parking lot lay still and silent beneath the faint glow of the street lamps. A few moths fluttered against the glass, their wings tapping faintly in the still air. Shaking off the lingering tension, I closed the window and returned to wiping down the soda machine. My reflection flickered in the stainless steel surface, tired eyes, messy hair tucked beneath my visor, and a faint sheen of sweat still clinging to my skin. "Guess the fries are haunted now," I muttered, the sarcasm settling the last of my nerves. "Maybe I should put that on the menu. Limited time special. Comes with a free existential crisis." The sound of my own voice helped chase away the silence as I wiped down the counter and checked the clock. 1:45 a.m. Only a couple more hours until my shift ended. Piece of cake. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. The faint sound of footsteps echoed from the kitchen, soft, deliberate, and much closer than before. My pulse spiked, every muscle locking in place as the air seemed to drop 10 degrees. My eyes darted toward the kitchen entrance, but I forced myself to look away before I could see anything. If you hear footsteps in the kitchen while alone, leave immediately without looking back. I backed toward the lobby, moving slower this time, as if rushing would draw attention. Each step I took seemed to echo against the tile floor. The footsteps behind me slowed as if matching my pace, closing the distance inch by inch. Don't look back. Don't look back. I reached the front counter and gripped its edge, heart hammering so hard it echoed in my ears. The air smelled faintly of burnt grease and something colder, like the metallic tang of distant rain. The footsteps paused, the air pressed against my skin, heavy and unmoving. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, soft and faint, something exhaled behind me. I bolted. My shoes squeaked against the tile as I sprinted toward the front of the restaurant, nearly slipping as I rounded the counter. My breath burned in my chest as I reached the lobby, heart slamming against my ribs. Silence. I stood frozen, hands braced against the counter as I waited, listened, begged the air to stay still. Nothing moved, no footsteps, no whispers. Just the distant hum of the ice cream machine, steady and patient in the quiet. After a long moment, I let out a shaky laugh that sounded more like a sob. What the hell is wrong with this place? I stood there for what felt like an hour, but the clock above the menu board told me it had only been minutes. My pulse still thudded in my ears, and my breath came too fast as I leaned against the counter, trying to shake the tension from my shoulders. The footsteps, whatever they were, had stopped, but the air still clung heavy and thick around me, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The hum of the ice cream machine droned in the silence like a distant heartbeat. I exhaled slowly, rubbing my hands against my apron as if I could scrub the goosebumps from my skin. "Get a grip, Sasha," I muttered under my breath. The sound of my voice grounded me. I clung to that shred of normalcy as I returned to my closing tasks, wiping down the soda dispensers and organizing the napkin holders. The faint buzz of the overhead lights and the distant hum of the fryer filled the quiet. Even the faint grease smell of the fryer oil was oddly comforting in its normality. Customers came and went sporadically, their presence breaking the suffocating silence. A woman in sweatpants and slippers ordered a coffee with an apologetic smile, and I resisted the urge to joke about her late-night fashion choices. Another customer, a tired-looking guy in a wrinkled suit, barely glanced at me as he grabbed his burger and left. But with each passing minute, the air felt heavier. The hum of the appliances grew louder, each sound pressing against my skin like invisible fingers. Even the overhead lights seemed to buzz with a low, electric hum that I could feel in my bones. At 2 a.m., the ice cream machine purred to life again. The sound was smoother than before. No sputters, no clunks, just a low, mechanical hum as it blinked its green ready light. I stiffened, my gaze snapping toward the machine. For a moment, I stood frozen, torn between the instinct to check it and the rule that screamed in the back of my mind: do not serve from the ice cream machine if it works perfectly after midnight. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to turn away. My hands clenched into fists as I grabbed a rag and focused on scrubbing the counter, ignoring the low hum behind me. It felt like a challenge, like the machine was waiting for me to slip up. The air pressed heavier against my skin, and the faint hum of the machine seemed to seep into my chest, vibrating beneath my ribs. My pulse picked up, quick and shallow, as if my body knew something my mind refused to admit. The phone behind the counter rang sharply, breaking the tension. I flinched at the sound, muttering a curse as I reached to grab it. "Hey, can I get a cone over here?" The voice cut through the air like a knife. I glanced up to see a guy at the counter, early 20s, messy blonde hair, and the kind of impatient stare that said he wasn't in the mood for delays. His fingers tapped against the counter as he gestured toward the ice cream machine. "One vanilla cone, please," he added, like I might have forgotten my job. My pulse jumped, panic rising in my throat as I glanced between the phone and the impatient customer. The phone kept ringing, sharp and insistent, and the guy's impatient tapping seemed to echo through my skull. "Yeah, 1 sec," I said, reaching for the phone. "I just need a cone. Come on, I'm kinda in a hurry." I winced, my nerves fraying as the sounds piled on top of each other. The phone, the tapping, the hum of the machine, all pressing against my skin until my brain scrambled to shut it all out. Without thinking, I turned, grabbed a cone from the dispenser, and pulled the lever on the ice cream machine. Smooth vanilla swirled neatly into the cone, perfectly formed and too flawless for a machine that usually acted like it needed therapy. The moment my hand touched the cone, the air shifted. Everything went still. The phone stopped ringing. The man's tapping fell silent. Even the hum of the appliances seemed to vanish, leaving a silence so thick it felt like the air had solidified around me. I swallowed hard, my breath catching in my chest, as a faint, metallic taste coated the back of my tongue. The air smelled sharp and cold, like the moment before a thunderstorm. "Sorry, here you go," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the heavy silence. I placed the cone on the counter, but the guy didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me with wide, glassy eyes that reflected too much of the overhead lights. "Sir?" I prompted, forcing a nervous smile. For a moment, he didn't respond. His lips parted slightly as if he was about to speak, but no sound came out. Then he blinked, and the tension broke like a snapped thread. "Oh, thanks," he mumbled, shaking his head like he'd just woken up. He grabbed the cone, his fingers trembling slightly, and walked toward the door without another word. As he passed the glass windows, I caught a glimpse of his reflection, and my heart stuttered in my chest. His reflection didn't match his movements. While the man walked with slow, unsteady steps, his reflection twitched and jerked as if it couldn't keep up. His arms hung too stiffly at his sides, and his head tilted slightly to the left, as though the muscles in his neck had forgotten how to hold it straight. I blinked, and the reflection snapped back to normal. Just a tired guy eating ice cream as he disappeared into the night. A chill crawled down my spine, and I took a shaky step back from the counter, swallowing against the metallic taste still clinging to my tongue. My gaze flicked to the ice cream machine, its green, ready light still blinking steadily as if mocking me. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, running a hand down my face. "All that over one damn cone?" The air seemed to press heavier around me, as if the restaurant itself had heard my words and was waiting to respond. I tried to focus on my closing tasks, but the tension clung to my skin like static electricity. Every sound seemed too loud. The faint hum of the freezer, the soft hiss of the fryer, even the distant hum of the overhead lights. As I wiped down the counter, a loud thud echoed from the kitchen. I jumped, nearly dropping the rag as my heart slammed into my throat. Spinning toward the kitchen, I held my breath, every nerve in my body screaming for me to run. But as I peered around the corner, my pulse slowed with a mix of relief and lingering dread. A mop had fallen from its hook, clattering onto the tile floor. "Seriously?" I muttered, my voice shaky with leftover adrenaline. "This place needs less ghosts and more non-slip mats." I crouched down, picking up the mop and setting it back in place with a shaky laugh. My pulse was still too fast, but the familiar rhythm of the closing routine helped ground me as I finished wiping down the equipment. By the time I returned to the front counter, the air had settled into an uneasy silence. The appliances hummed steadily, and the overhead lights buzzed faintly, but the heavy pressure in the air had lessened. Even the metallic taste had faded from my mouth. Maybe I'd imagined the reflection. Maybe the stress of the night was finally getting to me. Knock. 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 I froze. The faint sound echoed from the glass doors at the front of the restaurant. Soft, deliberate, and slightly too slow, as if whoever was outside wanted me to know they were there. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look toward the doors. The parking lot lay empty beneath the dim glow of the streetlights, and the glass reflected only my own pale face staring back at me. But for a moment, just a heartbeat, I thought I saw a flash of yellow in the reflection. My breath caught in my chest as I took a slow step back from the counter, my gaze fixed on the doors as if blinking would let something slip inside. The knock didn't come again. Every nerve in my body stretched thin. My reflection stared back at me from the glass doors, pale and wide-eyed beneath the fluorescent lights. I scanned the parking lot beyond, but there was nothing. No cars, no people. Just empty asphalt, shimmering faintly beneath the streetlights. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there, just beyond the glass. Watching. I swallowed hard, forcing my lungs to drag in a breath. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I stepped back from the counter, trying to shake off the lingering dread. Maybe it had been a moth hitting the glass, or a trick of my nerves. Nothing more than my overworked imagination. Still, the silence clung heavy to the air as I moved through the restaurant. The faint hum of the appliances the only sound beneath the buzz of the overhead lights. Even the fryer, so prone to sudden outbursts, sat dormant beneath its stainless steel lid. The next 5 minutes stretched on endlessly, each second dragging against my nerves like sandpaper. No more customers came through the drive-thru. The parking lot outside remained empty, the faint orange glow of the streetlights casting long shadows across the asphalt. I glanced toward the front doors, and my heart stopped cold. A figure stood just outside the glass. He wore a yellow hoodie, with the hood pulled low over his face, casting his features into shadow despite the overhead lights. His hands rested deep in the pockets of his hoodie, his posture unnervingly still. The fabric of his hood shifted slightly, as if he were watching me, though I couldn't see his eyes. Do not acknowledge the man in the yellow hoodie if he appears in the lobby. The rules slammed into my mind like a bolt of lightning, yanking me out of my frozen shock. My breath hitched as I jerked my gaze away from the glass, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself, forcing air into my lungs as cold sweat broke out along my skin. Don't look at him. Don't acknowledge him. I squeezed my eyes shut and counted to 3, swallowing against the rising panic. The air seemed to thicken with every heartbeat, pressing against my chest as if the restaurant itself had drawn closer around me. Behind the counter, the faint hum of the ice cream machine droned like a distant heartbeat. I kept my gaze locked on the cash register, forcing myself to focus on the familiar red numbers glowing against the screen. The man outside was just a shadow in the glass, just a trick of the night and nothing more. Bang! I jumped as a loud metallic clang echoed from the kitchen, sharp, sudden, and impossibly close. My pulse spiked as adrenaline shot through my veins. Without thinking, I spun toward the noise, and my gaze flicked back toward the glass doors. Our eyes met, or at least, I think they did. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I felt his gaze lock onto mine the instant our eyes aligned. The man's head snapped upward with a speed that wasn't human, too fast, too sharp, as if someone had yanked a puppet's strings. The hood fell back slightly, revealing a glimpse of pale skin stretched too tightly over his skull, as if his face was just a mask pulled too thin. He raised his hand in a slow, deliberate wave. I stumbled back with a gasp, heart hammering against my ribs as cold terror flooded my veins. My sarcastic thoughts vanished in an instant, replaced by pure, primal fear. The supply closet. The rule. Lock yourself in the supply closet until he's gone. I bolted from behind the counter, sneakers squeaking against the tile as I sprinted through the kitchen. My breath burned in my chest as I slammed into the supply closet door, fumbling with the handle as panic scrambled my fingers. Click. The door shut behind me, and I twisted the lock into place with a shaky breath. The air inside the closet was thick and stale, the faint smell of cardboard and cleaning chemicals pressing against my nose. Shelves of condiments and plastic-wrapped utensils loomed above me, their shadows tilting across the walls in the dim light filtering through the vent above the door. I pressed my back against the shelves, gasping for air as I strained to listen beyond the door. My pulse pounded so loudly in my ears that I could barely hear anything else, but the faint hum of the ice cream machine still echoed from the lobby, distant and steady. For a moment, there was nothing else. Then I heard the footsteps. Soft at first, just the faint shuffle of shoes against tile. But they grew louder with each step, slow and deliberate, as if whoever or whatever was out there wanted me to hear them. The footsteps approached the supply closet door and stopped just outside. I clamped a hand over my mouth to smother my breathing, tears pricking my eyes as adrenaline surged through my trembling limbs. The air in the closet felt too thick, pressing against my chest until I thought my lungs might collapse beneath the pressure. Scratch. 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 My heart seized in my chest as nails dragged against the wood of the closet door. Slow, deliberate strokes that sent chills crawling down my spine. The sound was faint but unmistakable, like claws raking gently against the surface just to let me know they were there. I bit down on my hand to keep from crying out. My eyes squeezed shut as I pressed myself harder against the shelves. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, to break through the door and sprint into the night, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think beyond the terror pounding through my skull. The scratching paused, silence pressed against my ears, broken only by the distant hum of the ice cream machine and the faint buzz of the overhead lights. I waited. Seconds dragged into minutes. Each heartbeat stretched into an eternity as I strained to hear even the faintest sound beyond the door. But the footsteps didn't return. The scratching didn't resume. The air in the closet seemed to grow heavier with every passing moment, as if waiting for me to move, waiting for me to break the silence. Finally, when I couldn't take it any longer, I sucked in a shaky breath and reached for the doorknob. My fingers trembled as I twisted the lock, each metallic click echoing in my ears like a gunshot. Slowly, I pushed the door open. The kitchen was empty. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting their pale glow against the stainless steel counters and stacks of plastic trays. The fryer sat dormant beneath its lid, and the soda dispensers hummed softly in the distance. But the air still felt heavy, as if the space itself had been holding its breath. I stepped cautiously into the kitchen, my pulse still thudding against my ribs. The faint taste of metal clung to the back of my throat as I crossed the tile floor, my shoes squeaking softly against the surface. Beyond the counter, the lobby stood empty beneath the flickering glow of the menu boards. The glass doors reflected the interior lights, turning the outside world into a dark void beyond the faint glow of the streetlights. I approached the front counter slowly, half expecting to see that yellow hoodie still standing just beyond the glass. But the parking lot was empty. The streetlights buzzed faintly against the night sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. But as I scanned the lot, my breath caught in my throat. A faint trail of yellow fabric disappeared around the corner of the building, as if someone had just vanished from view. My stomach twisted, and I stumbled back from the counter, pulse hammering in my throat as adrenaline surged through my veins. The ice cream machine hummed steadily in the silence, its green-ready light blinking faintly in the corner of my vision. My breath still came too fast, heart still hammering against my ribs as I stood frozen behind the counter, every nerve on edge. The glass doors reflected my pale face, eyes wide and wild beneath the fluorescent lights. But behind that reflection, the parking lot remained still and empty, as if the man in the yellow hoodie had never been there. Almost over. I clung to that thought like a lifeline as I tore my gaze away from the glass and forced myself back to the front counter. No more customers had come through since the man in the hoodie appeared. The drive-thru remained silent, its speaker dark and still. Even the hum of passing cars outside had faded into distant echoes, leaving the world beyond the glass unnervingly still. The air in the restaurant felt wrong in a way that went beyond simple nerves, thick with the sense that I was no longer alone. Shadows clung too long to the corners of my vision, shifting slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. Every faint creak of the building sounded too deliberate, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I clutched the rag in my hand tighter and forced myself to focus on wiping down the counter. The steady rhythm of the task grounded me. The faint smell of cleaning solution, cutting through the lingering metallic taste in the air. Each swipe of the rag against the stainless steel surface helped steady my pulse, dragging me back towards something that felt almost normal. But the silence pressed heavier with every second, the faint hum of the appliances growing louder until it seemed to vibrate beneath my skin. Don't think about it. Just finish the shift. I scrubbed harder, wiping down the soda machine until the stainless steel gleamed beneath the overhead lights. My reflection stared back at me from the polished surface. Tired eyes, messy hair, and tension etched deep into every line of my face. Then something shifted in the reflection. I froze, heart slamming against my ribs as my gaze flicked past my reflection toward the kitchen behind me. A figure stood near the back of the kitchen, half hidden in the shadows beyond the fryer. My breath caught in my throat as I turned, eyes locking onto the figure standing just beyond the stainless steel counter. It wore a McDonald's uniform identical to mine, red polo, black pants, visor tilted low over its face. Its back was turned, shoulders slightly hunched as if it had been mid-task when I spotted it. "Chris?" Relief flooded my chest, nearly buckling my knees with its intensity. I let out a shaky breath, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Hey, Chris?" My voice cracked slightly, but I managed to force out a laugh. "Man, you really know how to sneak up on someone." Almost gave me a heart attack. The figure didn't respond. My smile faltered. "Chris?" Slowly, the figure began to turn. Its movements were wrong. Too slow, too deliberate, like a marionette being dragged into motion by invisible strings. The air seemed to ripple around it as it twisted toward me, one jerky step at a time, until its face emerged from the shadows, and my breath died in my throat. Its skin was pale, too pale, like porcelain stretched thin over bone. Its eyes were hollow, empty sockets filled with nothing but shadow, yet I could feel its gaze locking onto mine with suffocating intensity. Its mouth stretched into a smile that wasn't a smile at all, too wide, too sharp, as if someone had carved it into its face and forgotten to stop. It took another step forward, limbs twitching at odd angles as if its joints didn't quite bend the way they should. I stumbled back, pulse hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Don't speak to them." The rule slammed into my mind too late, burning through my skull with the force of a warning I couldn't take back. My chest seized as if the air had been knocked from my lungs, and I stumbled back another step as the figure advanced, its smile widening until the skin at the corners of its mouth stretched too tight. The fryer hissed violently beside it, oil bubbling and spitting, as if reacting to the figure's presence. The metallic scent of burnt grease filled the air, thick and choking as the fryer roared louder than I'd ever heard. I backed away, heart hammering against my ribs as the figure took another step forward, then another. Its movements jerky and uneven, like a puppet struggling against invisible strings. Its hollow eyes never left mine, that carved smile stretching wider and wider until the skin seemed ready to tear. The fryer's hiss built to a fever pitch, the oil inside churning violently as if something unseen writhed beneath the surface. The air grew heavier with every step the figure took, thick with the faint crackle of static and the distant hum of something I couldn't name. My back hit the front counter, and I gasped as cold panic shot through me. There was nowhere left to go, nowhere to run except through the kitchen, past the figure blocking my path. It took another step forward, limbs twitching as its head tilted to one side with a sickening crack. The fryer roared louder beside it, the bubbling oil spitting against the metal walls of the machine as the heat rolled through the air in suffocating waves. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart hammering in my throat as I braced myself against the counter. And then, silence. The air dropped suddenly, the heat vanishing in an instant as the fryer went silent. I gasped, lungs dragging in air that no longer smelled of burnt grease. My pulse still pounded in my ears as I forced my eyes open, half expecting to see the figure looming inches from my face. But the kitchen was empty. The fryer sat dormant, its oil still and silent beneath the stainless steel lid. The lights above flickered once, twice, before stabilizing with a faint hum. I clutched the counter until my fingers ached, gasping for air as my pulse began to slow. The metallic taste still clung to the back of my throat, but the air had lost its suffocating pressure. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My knees threatened to give out beneath me as adrenaline drained from my limbs, leaving me shaking and breathless. Then the laughter started, soft at first, just the faintest whisper of sound that might have been my imagination. But it grew louder, echoing faintly through the air like distant static caught between radio stations. Thin, breathless laughter that sounded almost human. Almost, but too hollow, too distant, as if the voice had long since forgotten what it meant to laugh. I pressed my hands against my ears, squeezing my eyes shut as the sound swirled through the air, seeping into my bones and crawling beneath my skin. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, silence. I opened my eyes slowly, half expecting the figure to be standing behind the counter or reflected in the glass of the soda machine. But there was nothing, just the faint hum of the ice cream machine in the corner, its green, reddy light blinking steadily in the silence. Waiting. I swallowed against the lump in my throat, forcing my legs to move as I stepped back from the counter. My knees still shook beneath me, but I forced one foot in front of the other until I stood at the front of the lobby, hands braced against the counter as I stared out at the empty parking lot beyond the glass doors. The faint echoes of laughter still clung to the air, like the final note of a song that refused to fade. My breath came too fast, chest heaving as if I'd run a mile, but my feet hadn't moved more than a few steps since the figure vanished. My reflection in the glass door was pale and wide-eyed, lips parted as I struggled to pull in enough air. The restaurant was still, silent, empty, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it, something unseen pressing against the edges of the room, lingering just beyond the fluorescent lights. The air seemed thicker with every breath, clinging to my skin like invisible hands. I wiped my damp palms against my apron and swallowed against the metallic taste that still clung to the back of my throat. Then my gaze flicked to the clock above the menu board, and my stomach dropped. 2:32 a.m. My pulse slammed against my ribs, harder and faster than before. The last rule, the one I hadn't broken yet. If a customer orders food between 2:33 a.m. and 2:37 a.m., do not take their order. I didn't know what would happen if I did, but after tonight, I wasn't about to find out. I stepped behind the register, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. My knuckles ached from how tightly I clung to the cold metal, but I couldn't loosen my grip. The faint hum of the machines seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat, every sound sharpening against my ears. The air shifted, thickening with that familiar weight that pressed against my chest and made it harder to breathe. 2:33 a.m. I swallowed hard and stared straight ahead, gaze locked on the glowing numbers of the register. My reflection in the soda machine caught my eye, but I forced myself not to look. I didn't want to see what might be standing behind me. Silence stretched long and thin, pulling taut like a thread about to snap. Then the drive-through intercom crackled to life. I flinched as static burst from the speaker, harsh and distorted against the silence. The sound vibrated beneath my ribs, sharp and grating like nails dragged across metal. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached, forcing my gaze to remain fixed on the register. My fingers dug into the edge of the counter, breath coming in shallow gasps as the static swelled louder. Faint whispers threaded beneath the static, soft and distant at first, like voices heard from the far end of a tunnel. The air grew colder, wrapping around my skin like icy breath against the back of my neck. Then the whispers grew louder. Sasha. My stomach clenched as the voice spoke my name. It echoed through the intercom with a faint metallic edge, like a recording warped by static. Sasha, can I get a cone? The voice shifted mid-sentence, higher-pitched and impatient, echoing the customer who'd ordered the ice cream cone. Sasha, quarter pounder, no onions. The trucker's rough voice followed, layering over the first as if the intercom were cycling through every order I'd taken that night. Large coffee, please. Nuggets. 30 nuggets, please. Hey, can I get a cone? The voices overlapped and tangled together, too many at once, until they dissolved into frantic whispers that pressed against my ears like 1,000 unseen mouths. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms, heart hammering against my ribs as my lungs burned for air. The pressure in the room was unbearable, thick and suffocating, as if the air itself had grown too heavy to breathe. 2:34 a.m. The lights above flickered violently, shadows jerking and shifting across the walls as distorted reflections twisted through the glass windows. Shapes moved beyond the glass, dark silhouettes that flickered too fast to see clearly. I squeezed my eyes shut as the whispers swelled louder, crowding against my skull until I could barely hear my own heartbeat. My hands trembled against the counter, breath coming in ragged gasps as cold sweat clung to my skin. Sasha, Sasha. The voices pleaded now, begging and desperate, their words dissolving into sobs and laughter that echoed from the drive-thru speaker. The air grew colder with every heartbeat, and the glass doors at the front of the restaurant seemed to shudder faintly, as if something unseen pressed against them from outside. 2:35 a.m. I gasped as a faint thud echoed against the glass. The air in my lungs vanished, leaving me frozen in place as my gaze flicked toward the front doors. A shadow moved beyond the glass, tall and thin, too tall to be human. Its limbs stretched unnaturally long as it pressed one hand against the glass, fingers splayed wide against the surface. The faint outline of a face loomed just beyond the glass, but its features shifted and blurred like a reflection distorted by rippling water. I bit down on my lip hard enough to taste blood, choking back a scream as the whispers swelled louder, wrapping around my thoughts until I couldn't hear my own breath. The intercom crackled and hissed, voices overlapping faster and faster until the air itself seemed to vibrate with their urgency. 2:36 a.m. The pressure in the room peaked, crushing against my chest until my ribs felt like they might snap. My vision blurred at the edges as the air grew too thick to breathe. I clung to the counter, gasping against the suffocating weight of invisible eyes watching from every corner of the room. The whispers surrounded me, pleading and begging until their words became meaningless sound, just the raw, desperate need to be heard. Sasha, please, please. The shadows beyond the glass pressed closer, distorting the reflections until they twisted into faces I almost recognized. Customers who had come and gone, their eyes hollow and their mouths stretched too wide as they whispered my name. 2:37 a.m. The clock shifted. Everything stopped. The whispers vanished mid-sentence, cut off so abruptly that the silence hit like a slap to the face. The intercom fell silent. The air cleared, the suffocating pressure lifting from my chest like a weight had been dragged away. The lights above steadied, their steady hum somehow louder in the absence of sound. Even the faint metallic taste that had clung to the back of my throat was gone. I collapsed against the counter, gasping as if I'd been drowning and had only now broken the surface. My knees threatened to buckle, but I clung to the counter until my breath began to slow. For the first time in what felt like hours, the air tasted normal, just stale fryer grease and faint cleaning solution. My pulse still pounded against my ribs, but the tension that had wrapped around my chest had finally loosened. I glanced toward the front doors, half expecting to see those hollow-eyed faces still staring from beyond the glass. But the parking lot was empty. Even the distorted shadows had vanished from the glass. I swallowed hard and dragged a shaky hand across my face, biting back a hysterical laugh that threatened to bubble past my lips. I'd made it. I hadn't taken the order, and whatever had been waiting, it was gone. Slowly, I stepped back from the counter, forcing my legs to move even as adrenaline still buzzed through my limbs. The faint hum of the appliances was almost comforting now, a reminder that the rules had worked, that I'd followed the last one, and it had saved me from whatever waited beyond the glass. I turned toward the kitchen, heart still hammering as I forced my shaky legs toward the employee door. Only a few more steps, and I'd be outside, free of this place until the sun came up and chased away whatever lingered in the dark. Then the ice cream machine hummed to life behind me. I froze, blood turning to ice as the soft, mechanical purr filled the silence. The sound was smooth, too smooth, as if the machine had never broken in the first place. The faint smell of vanilla drifted through the air, sweet and cloying against the back of my throat. But there was something else beneath the hum this time, something I hadn't heard before. A faint, breathless chuckle. Soft as a whisper, but unmistakably there. I forced myself to turn, eyes locking onto the machine's green ready light as it blinked steadily against the stainless steel. Waiting. The faint laughter curled through the air, distant but impossibly close, wrapping around my thoughts until I could almost feel the breath against my ear. See you tomorrow. The words were a whisper of cold air against my skin, vanishing as quickly as they came. I stumbled back, heart hammering against my ribs as my pulse roared in my ears. My breath came in ragged gasps as I backed away from the machine, my mind screaming at me to run. But the restaurant was silent, empty. The ice cream machine's hum faded into the air, blending with the faint buzz of the overhead lights until I could almost convince myself I'd imagined it. Almost. I didn't wait to see if it would speak again. My hand hit the employee door, shoving it open as I stumbled into the cold night air. The distant hum of the streetlights buzzed faintly above me as I gasped against the chill, the taste of frost and distant asphalt washing away the last traces of burnt grease and metallic air. But even as I stepped into the parking lot, heart still racing against my ribs, I couldn't shake the final words that clung to the back of my mind. See you tomorrow.